Good afternoon. My name is John Cloxine, Property Tax Acting Director at the Department of Revenue. On behalf of the Department of Revenue, welcome to our fourth webinar covering property tax legislation enacted in 2017. To those of you that participated in our earlier webinars, welcome back. For those that are joining for the first time, we are glad that you are here. Before we get started, we wanted to tell you that our December webinar just went online today. We had production issues and apologize for the delay in getting that published. On your computer screen, we will be walking through some different information. You may need to periodically wiggle your mouse to avoid the screensaver kicking in. Your microphone should be muted. This will eliminate background noise and help the speaker be heard. Your microphones will remain muted throughout the call, but you can communicate with us at any time using the chat function. Several topics will be covered today. We have included answers to questions you submitted ahead of time whenever possible. At the end of each topic, the presenter will allow some time for you to chat your questions and provide an email address where you can ask additional questions after the webinar. We will allow up to a 5-minute window at the end of each topic so you can send us questions via chat. As the presenter is nearing the end of the topic, they will remind you to submit your questions about that topic. To send us questions or a technical issue using chat, click on the green chat icon at the top right of your screen. A chat window will appear on the lower right, and you can send us a question. In the box with the label Send To, please select Jesse Glancy. We will wait about a minute to see if there are questions. If you need more time, please type "question coming" for us, and we will wait a little longer. We will mute our line while we wait for questions. We will answer as many questions as possible during the 5-minute window at the end of each topic. If we aren't able to answer your question during the session, it will be addressed in a written Q&A after the session, addressing all the questions about the topic that we can at this time. Again, please chat to let us know if you're having trouble hearing, and we will try to adjust. Once again, at the end of the webinar, you will be asked to take a brief survey. Please take a few moments to let us know your thoughts. Your feedback is important, and it is used to make the process work better for all of us. The 2017 tax bill contains about 125 provisions that relate to property tax. It was a culmination of proposals worked on in the last 3 years. Over the next hour, we will share information about several of the 2017 legislative provisions that are already effective or will be soon. Additional information will be shared about provisions that are effective later as time approaches. Here at Revenue, we have assembled our colleagues who are knowledgeable about the topics presented today. We'll let each individual introduce themselves. Once again, my name is John Cloxine.
This is John Van Nerden, Supervisor of the State Assessed Property Section.
This is Emily Anderson, Supervisor of the Information Education Section.
And I am Bill Sparks. I work for the Auditor Treasurer Services Unit. And I'll start off today. We had a request for this topic, abatement of penalty, relating to new legislation on a 1-day grace period for property tax payments. I'll start this presentation by talking about the changes in the U.S. Post Office services statewide. There has been a consolidation of collection and delivery of mailed products. An increase of centralized post offices has created a separation in time between when an envelope is mailed and postmarked. This change allows the county treasurer to abate the penalty for late payment of property taxes if the envelope containing the payment is postmarked within 1 business day of the due date. It clarifies that if the postmark on the envelope is missing or illegible, the property owner may provide an affidavit as proof of mailing. This abatement is granted only once per taxpayer. We are aware of the fact that all counties have procedures in place for late payments. This provision will mostly affect counties that do not currently have an abatement policy for late payments. Those counties will now be required to adopt the one-time abatement policy. This is for taxes payable in 2018. Again, for more information and a refresher of what the requirements are, the The language can be found in Minnesota Statutes 279.01, Subdivision 2. Guidance on administration can be found in the updated Auditor-Treasurer Manual. If you have any questions regarding abatements of penalty for late payment of property taxes after this webinar, please email us at proptax.admin@state.mn.us. There were no questions submitted prior to the webinar. If you have any questions on this topic, please chat them in now. We will wait about 1 minute to see if there are questions, and we will then mute the line until we get questions. Currently, we have no guide. The question that was submitted was, do we have any guidance on how to track taxpayers who have received the one-time abatement? And we currently have no guidance on how to do that. This will remain one of the responsibilities of the counties in fulfilling the abatement of penalty. A question was submitted, does the county need the affidavit before abating the penalty? And our understanding is yes, the affidavit must be presented first before the abatement. We're not seeing any more questions on abatement of penalty, so at this point, we'll move on to Emily.
All right, again, this is Emily Anderson, and I will discuss the changes to the application and reapplication requirements for properties seeking exemption starting this year. One of the law changes made during the 2017 session authorized the Commissioner of Revenue to clarify and determine the types of exempt properties that must file applications and reapplications according to Minnesota statutes, sections 272.025, subdivision 3. As many of you know, there are a number of types of properties listed in the exempt statute 272.02. The list of those properties needing applications or reapplications have not been updated to reflect the additional subdivisions of new types of properties qualifying for exemptions that have been added over the past few years. For all properties to be covered, the new language required the Department of Revenue to publish a list of properties required to make an initial application and/or a reapplication every 3 years for exemption. On the screen right now, it's a snippet of the chart that can be found in the reapplication for property tax exemption memo that was sent on January 2nd of 2018. It can also be found in Module 5, titled Exemption of the Property Tax Administrator's Manual. The exempt properties are listed by statute reference, and the chart also shows whether only initial application is required or a reapplication is required every 3 years. Please know that there may be some properties that are now required to apply that haven't been statutorily covered in past years. These new application requirements are for new claims of exemption applications filed in 2018. The requirement of filing an initial application has not changed, so we recommend having an initial application on file for verification of granting the exemption. As you are aware, the exempt properties requiring reapplication, owners must reapply for exemption every 3 years. The last exemption year was in 2016, so 2019 will be the next exemption year to collect reapplications. Please review the list to be aware what properties need to reapply and plan accordingly. If the subdivision statute requirement was that the organization must be exempt from taxation pursuant to Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code, or otherwise known as a 501c3 organization, they will be listed on the column of needing to file an application every 3 years. As the 501c3 status may change, and it is important for assessors to verify that the organization still meets the statutory requirements for exemption. As a reminder, the assessor may ask for information necessary to grant an exemption at any time. If the organization is listed and only needing an initial application, however, the assessor feels additional information is needed to verify the exemption, you may ask the organization for additional documentation, just not statutorily require a new application be filed by January 1st deadline. You can find the list of application and reapplication requirements for exempt properties in the January 2nd memo that I talked about earlier that was sent to county assessors, and also in Module 5, Exemption of the Property Tax Administrator's Manual. We will have our question and answer session again on this topic up next, but if you have any additional questions later regarding the application and reapplication of exempt properties in the future, please email your questions to the information and education section at the address listed. There were no questions submitted prior to the webinar, so if you have questions on this topic, please chat them in now. And as a reminder, please select Jessie Glancy as the person to send your questions to, and we will filter those through. We will wait about 1 minute to see if there are any questions, and we will mute the line while we receive those questions. All right, it doesn't seem like there's any questions, so we will move on. So with Board of Appeal season around the corner, we wanted to remind you of another provision added this year regarding the Valuation Notice Mailing Requirement. Per statute, valuation notices must be sent to property owners 10 calendar days before the local Board of Appeal and Equalization or open book meeting. Starting in 2018, there is a new requirement if the assessor does not mail notices 10 days before. And that is the assessor must mail an additional notice and hold a supplemental local Board of Appeal or open book meeting. The new requirements go into effect for valuation notices mailed this year, so 2018. To avoid the new requirements, counties must simply mail notices 10 calendar days before the local Board of Appeal and Equalization or open book meeting. Again, if the valuation notices are not mailed 10 days before the meeting, the assessor must mail an additional valuation notice and convene a supplemental local board meeting and/or open book session. The supplemental meeting cannot be held earlier than 10 days after mailing that additional notice. You can find this information in the 2017 Law Summary and in Module 8, Assessment, Appeals, and Equalization in the Property Tax Administrator's Manual. Again, we will have our question and answer session on this topic up next, but if you do have any additional questions regarding the valuation mailing compliance in the future, please email your questions to the Information and Education section at the address listed. Again, for this topic, there were no questions submitted prior to the webinar. If you do have questions on this topic, please chat them in now to Jessie Glancy. Again, we will wait about 1 minute and we will mute in the meantime. All right, it does not look like we have any questions at this time, so we will move on.
Hello, this is John Van Erden, Supervisor of the State Assessed Property Section, again to talk to you about changes to the administrative appeals process. There were several amendments related to state-assessed property appeals in the tax bill from the first special session 2017, Chapter 1, Article 15. Proceedings and appeals for utility or railroad valuations are covered in Minnesota Statute Section 273.372, which is primarily the section which was amended. These changes can be divided into 3 categories based on what is affected. First, updates to the administrative appeal process. Second, settlement of administrative appeals by signed agreement. And third, administrative appeal and appeal to tax court. I will cover these categories at a high level as they may impact the counties. In context, for those who may not be aware, while most property is valued locally by county or city assessors, the valuation of certain kinds of complex property that tends to cover multiple jurisdictions are valued centrally by the state, and then these values are certified to the counties. It is worth noting that the values for certain categories of property are ordered, while others are recommended. The counties consolidate the locally assessed, county assessed, and state assessed property values and proceed with the rest of your administration of the property tax system. Generally, locally and county assessed properties are appealable through the local and county boards, potentially to the Department of Revenue and to tax court. State assessed property, however, is appealable through a different process in Minnesota Statute 273.372, as earlier mentioned. For state assessed property, previously there were 2 options for appealing to the Department of Revenue. One was an administrative appeal, which could be requested within 10 days of the valuation notice if the required reports were filed timely. The second was an informal appeal, which did not have a deadline per se, but to be effective needed to be as soon as possible after the valuation was sent and before the values were certified to the counties. This was similar in concept to the option for property owners to call the assessor if they have questions about the valuation notice from the county. Both of these options are different going forward. The administrative appeal process has been updated in several ways, and the informal appeal option has been repealed. But this does not eliminate the ability of the property owner from calling if they have questions. This is now simply what it is, a question, not an appeal. This process begins when the department issues the valuation notice to the property owner. A property owner may request an administrative appeal if they disagree with the valuation order they receive from the department. To do so, they must submit a written request for an administrative appeal within 30 days after the notice date of the order. The request needs to include the following information: name and address, the date of the notice being appealed, the Minnesota tax ID, the assessment year, the findings in the order they disagree with and why, and the property owner's signature or that of their authorized representative. They would also include documents or information that supports their appeal, such as their complete list of issues and concerns and supporting documentation, their proposed market value, including the methods they use to arrive at that amount, and financial forecasts, including but not limited to income, expenses, and capital expenditures. Finally, an appraisal, if one was performed. All this information is to be provided in the written appeal. Then, if a written appeal is received, we will schedule an appeal conference within 20 days of the appeal request. The property owner can choose not to participate in a conference. Following the appeal conference, we will issue an appeal determination within 30 days. That appeal determination is appealable to the Minnesota Tax Court. Now, the exact format of the Administrative Appeal Conference has not been finalized at this time. However, the overall format will be that the property owner, including at least one authorized representative, will be present to discuss the issues. Also, the assessor who completed the valuation will be present to discuss the issues as well. The appeal will be heard by a panel, which will also ask questions. Panel members will likely include the Director of Property Tax, the State Assessed Property Supervisor, the Property Tax Compliance Officer Supervisor, and the Supervising Attorney for Property Tax. Those on the panel will not have been involved in the valuation. The written documentation will be reviewed in advance of the appeal conference. The administrative appeal is to resolve issues to the extent possible prior to the owner bringing an action in court. The administrative appeal can have three possible resolutions. One is that the panel will issue an administrative appeal determination following the appeal conference. Then, if that property owner disagrees with that appeal determination, it can be appealed to tax court within 60 days after the notice date of the appeal determination. The other two were created by recent law changes and will be discussed separately in following. Another possible resolution of an administrative appeal is now settlement. The Commissioner may settle any matter under administrative appeal when it appears to be in the best interest of the state. The settlement agreement must be in writing and signed by the Commissioner and the company or the company's authorized representative. Settlement agreements reached during administrative appeal are final and are not appealable to tax court. The third possible resolution of an administrative appeal is if the property owner files an appeal on the order with the tax court. If the property owner files both an appeal with the tax court and an administrative appeal with the department, we will dismiss the administrative appeal. The appeal will then progress through the process of the tax court. The extended deadlines and timing, coupled with efforts to eliminate issuance of multiple revisions, has led to this updated timeline. We will begin sending valuations around the beginning of May, and all railroad valuations are expected to be sent by the end of May. All utility and pipeline valuations are expected to be sent by the end of June. The first administrative appeals are likely to be filed before the full 30 days have passed. Therefore, it is likely that the administrative appeal conferences will begin in mid-May. However, due to the extended deadlines in this statute, the administrative appeal conferences may go later into the year than in the past. The last of the appeal conferences could be held approximately 2 months after the last valuations are sent. After an administrative appeal conference, we have 30 days, which is down from 60 days under previous law, to send the administrative appeal determination unless a settlement was reached or the company files a tax court petition on the same order. This means that the railroad certifications, or the values certified for railroads on June 30th, will not reflect conclusion of pending administrative appeals. Instead, if there are any changes as a result of the administrative appeals, those will be aggregated and included into a single corrected certification. Counties are to review the certification and property records and report any corrections to those records to us as soon as possible for them to be aggregated and included in the corrected certification. The deadline for this is August 31st, though it is likely to be completed earlier. Around June 30th, we will also be posting the preliminary spreadsheet for utility and pipeline values on our website. Counties are to review the property records and report any corrections to those records to us as soon as possible for them to be aggregated in that certification. The utility and pipeline administrative appeals are also extended due to the longer deadlines, but the certification will be issued by August 1st. If there are still any changes due to property record issues or administrative appeals, those will be addressed in a single corrected certification by the deadline of October 1st. And all non-clerical corrections must be resolved by those dates. Clerical corrections may be corrected until December 31st and may require a new certification. These changes are effective for assessment year 2018 and thereafter. Starting June 30th, counties do need to review the certifications and property records and report any corrections to those records to us as soon as possible. Counties then need to be prepared to update the records for any corrections, including from us regarding state-assessed property. A final point that I would like to emphasize here is that the responsibility for accurate and complete property records begins and ends with the counties. As with anyone else, when utility, pipeline, or railroad obtains new property, the property record is created at the county by the county. Prior to the valuation each year, we send each company the final property records for the previous year, which they are to update for changes over the year and then file with us as their property record report. We do review these records and may ask companies to verify changes, but cannot assign parcel IDs or verify that the property records are both complete and accurate, as this is the responsibility of each county for their own records. Whether purposefully or inadvertently, changes are made to the property records by the companies. This is why each county needs to review the certifications and property records and then report any and all corrections to the records to us so that we can completely and accurately apportion the value to each property record. Then the counties can use those certified values and proceed with the rest of your administration of the property tax system. If you would like to learn more about the administrative appeals process for utilities, pipelines, and railroads for state assessment, you can go to the Revenue website and enter the search keyword State Assessed Property. Relevant information is in the Appeal Rights section for utilities and railroads. The Property Tax Law Summary and Minnesota Statutes Section 273.372 make for more technical reading. As always, if you have any questions about this or anything else related to state-assessed property, please feel free to email them to us at sa.property@state.mn.us. There were no questions prior to the webinar on this topic. If you do have any questions on the topic now, please chat them in. We'll wait about 1 minute to see if there are any questions, and we will mute the line until we get questions. Hello, we did receive a question regarding if the assessor is notified if the owner does file an administrative appeal, and the answer to that is no. We would notify the counties, and we do, if a tax court petition is filed. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any more questions on this topic, so we'll move on.
In the meantime, we did have one more question come in on the one-time abatement. And the question was, does the abatement apply to a taxpayer or to the parcel, and the abatement applies to the taxpayer.
Thank you. Well, this wraps up our webinar for today. If you have questions about the provisions discussed today, please send them to us using the property tax contact information. This webinar will be made available online for your future reference and for those who could not attend today. The questions you submitted during the webinar will be summarized and answered and also posted to the web. Continue to submit your questions on these and other provisions using the contact information on the previous page. We will respond as soon as we can. You can find more information about these provisions and others in the law summary. Use keyword search 2017 Property Tax Law Summary. Our priorities for preparing memos and other clarifying information are being driven by effective date. We will communicate about other provisions as we near their effective date or the time when you or revenue need to take some action. At the end of this webinar, a very short survey will automatically open. If you can, please take the time to share any feedback you have about this webinar or topics you'd like us to cover. There will be at least one more webinar scheduled to discuss 2017 legislative changes. We are currently planning to cover these topics. If there is a topic that you don't see on the schedule but would find useful for us to cover, please contact Jamie Hopkins at jamie.hopkins@state.mn.us. For your reference, the webinars are located under Property Tax Administrators tab under Local Governments. The topics covered in each webinar may change slightly based on questions and feedback that we get. Currently, our spring schedule for webinar will include assessor accreditation waiver, assessor fees, County Board of Appeal and Equalization changes, and the changes to the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act. Thank you to all who participated. Please let us know how this worked for you by completing the survey. This concludes our webinar today.